Hey guys, welcome back to Chariot Palmistry. This is the third video in a series that I'm calling the most important video series I'm ever going to make. And if you guys haven't watched the first two videos, I'd strongly recommend that you go back and watch those now, because understanding those will help you make the most out of this video here. Just as a very basic summary though, my first video was built on the premise that the industrial age is collapsing around us, whilst the information age is being built up around it. We had a look at what the implications of that would mean for society. The last video was talking about how to preserve the four primary kinds of wealth: your health, your family, your financial wealth, and also your spiritual wealth. But that last video got really long, so I just cut it in the middle there, looking at only health and your family. This video will be talking about your financial well-being and also your spiritual well-being in this time of change and transition. So let's jump straight into this. The first question I want you guys to ask yourself is, what sort of job do you want to have right now in the information age? Do you want to have an industrial age job, or would you like to have an information age job? I hope this question is very easy to answer. Most of you, I'm hoping, you're saying you'd want to have an information age job. But what exactly does that mean? You see, industrial age jobs, their wages are actually stagnating and they're going backwards if anything, whereas information age jobs are booming. So to give you just a very quick, simple idea of this, imagine someone today who wants to grow up and be an artist, like a 10-year-old child. Let's say you had to mentor them. Would you enroll them into an art school like people did, say, 100 years ago? Or would you get them into college and get them to study, I don't know, graphic design or some sort of video game design type of course? If you want your kids to have an information age job, you'd go with the latter. If you want your kids to have an industrial age job, you'd go with the former. Doing things the old way, at least in terms of education, will create an industrial age employees at a time where the industrial age is ending. Similarly, creating information age education or supporting an information age education will create your kids being born into the information age. I know that's sort of a long-winded way of saying this, but not only should you answer this question for yourself, do you want an industrial age job or an information age job? You should also have a look at what sort of job you want your kids to have, because the actual skill set that they'll apply is exactly the same if it's painting on a canvas or if it's painting on an iPad or what have you, but the application is very different. And I suppose children are probably the most important variable in all of this. To answer the question, what kind of job should your children have? Let's maybe step back from that and have a look at the industrial age. In the industrial age, people weren't really focusing on individuality or individual talents of kids. They'd be put into primary school, they'd go to high school where they'd learn a set of skills, then to college and then into the workforce. Everybody's skill set was replaceable. Actually, I should say everybody was replaceable. They were just bringing a certain specific set of skills into their career. The information age is going to completely change all of this. Do you remember how in the past videos, how I was talking about there being four primary kinds of energy? Similarly, there are four kinds of minds that children have. In fact, this is actually parallel to the four minds that adults have. It's just that kids are better with their minds than adults are. The first type of mind is the intellectual mind. That's mostly ruled by Jupiter. You can see this on the hands of kids if they have this orange line that I've got on the graphic over here. Intellectual people love to learn about new ideas, but they love to be taught new ideas as well. The second type of mind kids have is a social mind. These are kids who are just naturally magnetic and they can attract people all around them and hold a conversation, make people laugh, and then lead a team into doing good things. These are sun-based people. And successful sun-based thinkers have a strong sun line, as you can see on this graphic here. Then the third type of mind is an intelligent mind, which is ruled by Mercury. You may be thinking to yourself, well, hang on a second, what's the difference between an intellectual mind and an intelligent mind? It's the difference between Jupiter and Mercury. See, Jupiter, or intellectual minds, they learn information from the generation before them. Their teacher, their teacher's teachers, and their teachers, and so on. Mercury people, or intelligent people, they solve problems on their own. So they're the people who figure it out for themselves. They're bright thinkers and they're problem solvers especially. But the basic difference here is generations. Do you figure stuff out on your own, or do you learn it from other people? And in the industrial age, the Mercury people were the ones who struggled the most in the school system, because the school system was designed to impart knowledge from previous generations. Whereas the Mercury people, they just want to have a go at, breaking things and figuring them out all for themselves. They incidentally also became the most successful business people after they struggled through many years of school. And then the fourth type of mind over here is the hard-working type, the Saturn-based energy. Most people will have a strong Saturn line on their hand, but then after a little while that line gets thinner and one of the other lines takes over. The path to success in the industrial age was through simple hard work. You'd put 30, 40 years into your career, and then eventually you'd retire, and that's how people became successful then. In the information age, I don't think that's going to happen. I think primarily it'll be a combination of all four of these skills that will lead to success. And so what you'd like to do is guide your children into information age jobs based on their strengths, not based on which jobs make the most money, because that method or that strategy worked in the old age. It's not going to work in the new age anymore. Keep in mind that all industries based on the industrial age are also going to collapse. So that example I gave before of a potential art student, the art industry as we know it today is most likely going to collapse. In fact, we've already seen the start of it happening already with AI generated art, with NFTs and other things like that. The art industry isn't going to exist as it is, and so you probably shouldn't be guiding your children into a career in art. Guide them into a career in AI generating art, or in NFTs, or graphic design, video game design, animation, all of those sorts of things. They can use their brilliant mind to be successful in those areas. Now that I've mentioned AI, I should probably also mention that AI isn't going to take away everyone's job. A lot of headlines these days are talking about how the computers are going to take away everyone's job. That's not the case. It's only going to take away the industrial age jobs. You see, AI needs teachers, or Jupiterians. That's why they call it machine learning. You need someone who can always teach the machine how to grow and build its knowledge base. Now, the other thing to remember here is if Jupiter does indeed rule the information age, then that means the most successful people in the future will be the philosophers, the teachers, and the monks. So now that we've talked very briefly about this new generation of kids that are being born and how their minds are being molded, I also want to share a simple observation that I've made and have been making for quite some time now. See, I'm convinced that a new generation is secretly being born. There are palmistry symbols that are coming up on the hands of people that were once considered very rare. Things like temple symbols or rings of Jupiter, even early retirement lines. These were, if you read the olden day palmistry books, they tell you that the ring of Jupiter, for example, was a very, very rare symbol. And the writers writing about it in the 1800s, they'd only seen it 2 or 3 times in their entire career. But speaking now in the information age, I'm seeing it on the hands of almost everyone that I read for these days. The temple symbol, which is that big triangular thing with the 2 squares underneath it, that was a very rare sign once upon a time as well. Now I'm seeing it everywhere. This symbol basically is a sign of someone who builds a charity or builds a temple in their lifetime. Before, people couldn't even dream of doing something like that, but we're seeing it all over the place right now. What this means is that this new generation of kids that are coming through now focus more on spirituality, focus more on giving back to their community, not really working so much anymore. And the simple observation with this is that more people now are actually interested in meditation, yoga, and Jyotish than ever before in human history. It's basically because of the internet and YouTube and social media and what have you. People are becoming more and more attracted to this. So the observation, therefore, is that millennials are actually very, very annoying. They're more spiritual than we are, they're smarter than we are, they've got access to more information than we ever had, they're probably going to be healthier than we are, live longer than we are. By every objective measurement, they're going to have a better life than us. Yes, they're annoying, but at the same time understand that Gen X, Gen Y people, and also the baby boomers are even worse. You see, the baby boomers were born in the industrial age. Their whole society is collapsing around them, and they don't know what to do about it. The Gen X and Gen Y people, they're full of either mystics or traumatized people. They were born in the industrial age, and they're going to grow up and become of age in the information age. They've got one foot in both worlds, and they don't know which is the right one. But it's the millennials, the one who've only known the internet and the age of technology, they're the ones who are going to be the most successful in the future. I think the world's going to be just fine in their hands. In fact, the best thing we can do is to empower them and then just get out of their way. So I'll give a few other little bits of advice for parents of kids in the information age, then we'll get back to the whole economics and finance side of this video here. One important skill that you want to teach your kids is you want to teach them how to learn. You see, the industrial age was mostly about kids who could work hard. The most successful kids at school were the hardest working ones. In the information age, it's the kids who can learn the best that will thrive the most. And just as a simple observation here, the energy for your education is similar to the energy of your paternal grandfather. So if your child's father's father had a lot of difficulties in his life, then your kid is probably going to have a lot of difficulties in his school years. Similarly, if that parent had a lot of trouble, or actually not trouble, let's say they succeeded at school, they did very well, then your kid's probably going to do really well at school too. There's an important karmic energetic pattern here. At the same time, the energy for your higher education is similar to that of your father. Meaning if your father struggled a lot in school, if your father struggled a lot generally throughout their life, then you'll struggle a lot at your universities. Whereas if he did well in his life, then you'll do well in your universities. So you'll be able to map a strong correlation between the male ancestors of a child and how they'll do at school. Then you can create the right strategies to help them learn the best in this time. In this time also, you should teach your kids to stay away from sociopaths. Now, this is generally sage advice for every young person just in any time era that they're born in, but understand that the society that the sociopaths have created is actually crumbling around them. And as that happens, they're going to become more and more desperate for more victims. You don't want your kids getting caught up in all of that. More recently, the West has been losing its mind over gender pronouns or whether climate change is going to destroy the world and all this. These are all sociopath-based protests or ideologies. They're not actually helping the world in any significant way, but we can see a lot of kids and a lot of young people's minds getting warped and destroyed by being extremists on either side here. The other bit of advice I'd give for kids is to get them into meditation. And also at the same time, teach them what meditation actually is. I was talking to a friend of mine, he's in his, I think, mid to late 20s. He's a video game addict. And I was telling him, when you play video games, you're actually meditating. He didn't understand the concept of this. You see, the word for meditation in India is dhyan. Dhyan means concentration. So whenever you're concentrating on something, you're actually meditating. Now you can, in theory, meditate sitting with your legs crossed, just focusing on your breathing. You can meditate while you're jogging or in exercise. You can meditate listening to music, or you can meditate playing video games. The key here is if you can get your kid to sit still in one chair, focused on one thing for more than 48 minutes, then they're meditating, and they're actually meditating at a very high level here. Now, they may not be, playing Fortnite for an hour is probably not as good a form of meditation as maybe sitting and breathing for an hour, but it's still a valid form of meditation. So if you have kids that are playing video games or wasting their time on doing things that you don't like, understand they're probably meditating here. You want to encourage them into this, but you also want to guide their mind so that they can focus on higher ideals as well. So once you do all of this, the next and only missing variable here is that you want to be able to teach your kids how to invest. Remember, in the industrial age, the way to make money and become wealthy was to work hard at it over many, many decades. In the information age, kids will be taking information and using that to grow their wealth, which is basically through investments. So let's talk about the general lay of the land in terms of the economy over the next few decades. Then we can make sense on how best for kids to invest for the rest of their lifetimes. Now, the big takeaway here is that as the industrial age declines, it's generally going to destroy itself and most of the world. It's also going to destroy most of the economies around the world. And one big debate that a lot of economists are having at the moment and have been having really since the GFC is if inflation is going to take over the world in future or if it's deflation. Inflation basically means prices go up. Deflation means the economy goes down and prices go down with it. And economists aren't really sure which of the two it's going to be. But I think this is the wrong approach to this. Look at this in terms of the clash of ages instead. Technology, or the information age, I believe, is fundamentally deflationary. What I mean by that is that the more technology that's produced, the worse it is for the economy overall. Think of, I don't know, what's a good example here? Think of like the photocopying machine. In the olden days, before the photocopier existed, if you wanted to reproduce a document, you'd hire someone to handwrite it out 10 times. Now you just go to a photocopier, hit a button, and then you can get 10 copies of it. Which means one person has lost his job because of the photocopier machine. So in that sense, it's taken value away from the economy, right? It's made one complex job or one laborious job far simpler. And in that sense, tech is deflationary. In fact, we can see this also in the modern world with AI. Just a year or two ago, there were headlines all over the place about Google laying off employees because AI took their jobs over. You can see how technology will shrink an economy because it makes an existing job so much easier. But at the same time, the industrial age was fundamentally inflationary. What that meant was over time, jobs would be created, which would increase wages, which would increase prices. And so things became sort of an upward spiral that way. The industrial age was based on the assumption that there'd always be a better invention or a more efficient way of doing things, and therefore the economy and world would always grow. And that's why the central banks, which were built in the industrial age, want inflation so bad. The whole assumption of the industrial age was that there'd always be growth. But what I'd like you to understand is that inflation, as we know it today, is the result of the death of the industrial age. We're not making better industrial age products anymore. Therefore, the central banks are trying to create artificial inflation. And if you look at this really as a conflict, you'll see that deflation is actually the result of the success of the information age. Meaning the better technology we have, the more deflation we have. Meanwhile, central banks are trying to prop up inflation artificially. They do this with government stimulus, money printing, and things like that. So look at inflation versus deflation through this lens, and you'll see that deflation must win, because the information age is going to destroy the industrial age, and there's really should be no two ways about that. That conflict can only go one way. Now this deflation, it's probably going to come about as a result of money printing, which we'll talk about in a couple later slides. And if that happens, it's probably going to cause a hyperinflationary depression, like Weimar Germany. And again, I'll come back and I'll explain why I think that's inevitability in a few slides here. But for now, I want you to think about your financial future as being dependent on who will win. Is it the industrial age or the information age? Meaning, is it inflation or deflation? Or to put it another way, is it the central banks or technology? Once you figure that out, also make the observation that cryptocurrency has already made some central bank functions redundant, and it's going to continue to do so through innovation. So who will you trust? Is it the old banks or the new blockchains? You really need to pick which side you want to be on. Now, I believe it's going to be contraction, meaning deflation. There's two ways that an economy can go down or shrink. It's either via recession or via depression. So if you believe that deflation is going to win, then you've got to figure out what the consequences of this are. A recession is basically a period of negative growth that goes on for about 2 quarters or more. So generally for between 6 to 12 months, the economy is shrinking in a recession. In a depression is basically the same thing, but it's when the economy shrinks for a longer period of time. Now remember, the industrial age is built on the premise of constant growth. And if we see that that constant growth is not going to happen in the future, then you'll also have to acknowledge that all the world economies and their debts that they're based on have to be defaulted on or shrink at some point in the future. Again, the assumption of constant growth, which kind of works somewhat in the industrial age, may not work in the future. There's no reason to assume that growth will be constant in a period where technology is taking away growth. So what I think we should expect is a longer economic contraction to take place, because what we're literally witnessing is the end of an age, an end of an era. This isn't something that can be just wrapped up in 6 to 12 months. So before we talk a little bit more about that deflation side of things, in an economic sense, let's talk about this in an energetic sense. I want to show you guys one very important leading indicator here. Now, I use the tagline here that women are smarter than economists. It's an energy thing here. You see, if we think that depression is inevitable, I want you to have a look or take a study of women's libido. See, women's libido is all based around the energy of Venus. And Venus is a growth-based planet in the sense that it gives birth to the next generation. Women are so much smarter than we give them credit for, because when they plan to have children, they're planning not just for the pregnancy of the next 9 months. They're trying to figure out, will they be able to care for this child for the next 5 years, 10, 20 years, and provide for it materially, look after it in terms of safety. They're thinking long term. And one thing economists have noticed is that when women's libido falls, that's normally a precursor to a falling economic crisis or circumstance. Whenever there's a great famine that's about to come along, women's libido goes down. So that's the Venus side of the equation here. A depression is generally mixed around the energy of Saturn. So if you think of women's libido being high, as in having more babies, creating bigger families and so on, that's positive Venus, but when it's negative, it aligns with the energy of Saturn, that contracts energy. So one thing you'll be noticing right now is there are headlines all around the world about declining birth rates. You see, when countries like China, Korea, the United States, when the women in those countries aren't producing more children for the next generation, that's coming about that their subconscious is telling them that the future is very bleak. Yeah, it's really that bad. Women collectively, their mating decisions are the reason that our species have survived. And I would trust, the collective decisions of 100 women over 100 of the most brilliant economists to predict the future. But there's an actual principle for this, and that's known as a hemline index. And you'll see that on this graph in the bottom right here. What it basically says is that in times of economic abundance, the hemline, meaning the length of a dress of a skirt, tends to go up the leg. meaning women show more skin in times of economic prosperity. They're basically competing with other women to attract a mate at a time where there are more resources. But then when the economy crashes and money is harder to come by, then women, they cover up their legs more. Or rather, they prefer dresses that go all the way down to their knees or mid-shin area or even the ankle. This is an economic indicator known as a hemline index, and it's something that economists have been following since the 1920s. So what I want you guys to do is, putting the whole Venus, Saturn and Jyotish side of it, the equation to one side, have a look at women's magazines over the next 3 years or so. In one of my previous videos, I predicted an economic fall to take place in late 2026 into the early part of 27. Have a look at the fashion magazines in that period of time. Are the women then wearing longer dresses than they were 6 months ago or 12 months ago? If they are, then you'll be able to see that Venus is predicting an economic fall to take place. So the next question then is to figure out who are the women competing with. See, the reason the dresses grow longer and shorter over time is because women compete with each other for a mate. And if they're not competing with each other, it means there's not that many women wanting to have a child at that time. The other thing I'd suggest is have a look around your local mall as well. Just notice the type of clothes that women are wearing. Again, collectively, women are much better decision makers than any professional. And the reason we know that is because all of us are alive today because of that reason. Now, the other theory I want to talk to you guys about, just in regards to this Venus libido thing here, is known as the grandmother theory. You see, the grandmother theory says that the age of human beings is 3 times the age at which women first have children. Meaning, back in the Stone Age, women were having children when they were about 12 or 13 years old. If you multiply that number by 3, let's say 12, then you get to the age of 36, which is what the average life expectancy was in the early Stone Age. Then in the Bronze Age, they started having children at about the age of 16, and life expectancy all of a sudden shot up to about the early 40s. In the Industrial Age, women started having children between 18 to 21. Well, yeah, actually it was about that period, and that's why life expectancy for the baby boomer generation, for the World War II generation, went all the way up to 60. For the baby boomers and for the Gen X and Gen Y people, they started having children at about 25 to 30, which is why life expectancy for those generations is between 80 to 100. Now, in my previous video, I said that the current generation, the millennials, should expect to live up to the age of 160. So if you take 160 and divide it by 3, you get to about 53, which means women in future should be having children at the age of 53. The sociological logic behind this whole idea is that a woman needs to be born and then have her mother help take care of the next generation. So women survive long enough in order to help the grandkids be raised. That's why they call this the grandmother theory. And it seems to have worked for women and really for all of humanity for as far back as we can see. So have a look at these two things, the hemline index, and you'll see that in real-time application through fashion magazines in the coming years. Also have a look at fertility rates and the average rate at which women have children in the years ahead. The longer it gets means the fewer children are being born, which means the worse the economy is going to be. And then also have a look at the big picture here as well, because it seems to be that almost all planets are trying to create a depression right now. Mercury, the planet for business, is taking the life out of industrial age companies and breathing life into information age companies. Venus, via women's libido, is already showing signs of contraction. Saturn, the planet for contraction, just does it generally everywhere. Jupiter, the planet for the information age, is already starting to take over the industrial age. And then Rahu, Ketu, they're always trying to destroy the society anyway. So of the 9 major planets, 6 of them are already trying to contract the economy. The only 2 that aren't doing it are the Sun and Mars. And Mars normally works through male energy, and maybe I'll do a video on that at some point in the future, but Mars energy normally buckles with a war. Meaning if there's a war in the future, then Mars will actually turn against society and actually start to contract the economy around it. I want you guys to also have a look at this general observation that after every economic crisis or contraction, there's usually a war. Which means first Venus comes and it contracts fertility, then Mars comes and it destroys all of society. Look at the last couple major wars that humanity has fought, like World War II, for example. Just before that came the Great Depression and also the hyperinflation in Germany. Just before the Vietnam War started, there was a great economic crash that took place in America. Just before the war on terrorism started, there was the dot-com bubble and a whole bunch of other economic contractions happening throughout the world as well. So it always happens that the economy crashes and war follows it, which means at some point in the future, as this economy crashes, as I believe it will, there has to be a big war to counterbalance that energy. Venus and Mars, they always balance each other out, just as masculine and feminine energy always balance each other out. Then the only other planet then is the Sun. And the Sun never goes retrograde, it never tries to destroy society because the Sun is society. But it can collapse just as every government collapses. So it'll be the last, the last man standing, but it won't stand forever, which means a depression is inevitable. Okay, so the question then is, if we're going down the path of a depression, what is the energy of this going to be like? And I believe it's going to be based all around the energy of Saturn. You see, if Rahu creates the circumstances of a society's destruction, then it's Saturn that brings about the final destruction and creates the rebirth of that society. You see, it's only the prepared who survive a depression. And Saturn loves to reward people who take preemptive steps to protect their wealth. So Saturn rewards the prepared. And Saturn-based wealth, or Saturn's wealth, is based on tangible things. Things like gold and silver, real estate. All this stuff is Saturn-based wealth. And that's really what you want to be holding during a depression. Now, the only unknown in this one here is cryptocurrency. It's so new, we haven't had there's no economic data on how crypto does during a depression. We know during the Great Depression, gold and silver did pretty well, so did real estate and all these things. It's an unknown right now. And it's also an energetic unknown here as well, because cryptocurrencies is like the outsider investment, outsider relative to the mainstream financial system. In that sense, cryptocurrency mirrors the energy of Rahu to a large degree. But if you've been following me on this channel, you'll notice that I've been saying that this current bull market of cryptocurrency is going to be based on the energy of Jupiter. And Jupiter is a friend to the information age. So I think cryptocurrencies should do well if there's a depression in the years ahead. But to make sure about this, I'd like you to study Argentina. I'd like you to study Turkey as well. Both of these countries have gone through big inflation in recent years. In Argentina's case, it's actually hyperinflation. And these countries have had a big crypto adoption take place, meaning cryptocurrencies have actually helped their people go through their hyperinflations and their depressions. I also want you to have a look and study India's economy and crypto adoption over there too. In fact, just make this general advice over the next couple of years. Keep your antenna up for crypto adoption in these 3 countries, India, Turkey, and Argentina. They'll give you an idea on how cryptocurrency will help you, or if it'll help you, in the event of a depression. But even otherwise, it's a good idea to have Saturn-based wealth during all this time. The other thing I should mention is you should also have a look to secure some sort of food source as well. Either grow it for yourself or buy a farm. You see, during a depression, people starve because their earning capacity declines. If they lose their job, their wages are reduced, and therefore they can't afford as much food. So what you should be looking at is having some kind of food source that you and your family are entirely in control of, that can feed you for a little while and get you through any hardships. And you don't have to do this now, but you should get started very soon. See, remember I was saying before that Saturn rewards long-term thinking? Well, planting the seeds now to yield fruit maybe 3 years from now is the sort of thing that Saturn loves. And if you prepare now, then it will give you those rewards a few years from now. The part B to all of this, I suppose, is that hyperinflation is probably going to be in our future. Remember, central banks want to prop up inflation as long as they can because their whole existence depends on it. Whereas the information age and the technology it produces is going to create a depression, which means we're most likely headed for a hyperinflationary depression in the years ahead. And energetically, I want you to see this as a conflict between Rahu and Saturn. Rahu being the hyperinflation, the illusion of what wealth is through money printing, and Saturn being the depression side of things. It's actually both of these working against us at the same time. In previous generations, governments would literally print money. Literal banknotes that people would keep in their wallets or in their wheelbarrows as they'd go shopping. But in the coming years, now that we're not using cash so much anymore, the governments are probably just going to digitally print money and put it straight into your bank account. We saw this happen in a lot of countries during the COVID era, and it's probably going to happen at an increasing degree in the years ahead. So as this happens, as governments announce more and more stimulus programs, I want you guys to be cautious. See that as Rahu trying to manipulate and deceive society. I want you to pivot your energy and focus more on Saturn. You see, during a hyperinflation, debt becomes very difficult to manage, but it becomes very easy to manage in a hyperinflationary depression, which means if you have, say, I don't know, a home loan of $100,000 and your interest rate is 5%, but inflation is 1,000%, then your $100,000 loan is the equivalent of maybe $1,000 in today's money. So you can pay that loan off very, very quickly. And so if we do go down the path of a hyperinflationary depression, which I think is the most likely scenario considering the energy, and you're willing to take risk, then you should have a look at picking up fixed rate debt. Also, be aware that during this time there could also be bank closures taking place as well. So you want to have some money outside of the banking system. That's that crypto and gold and silver stuff that we were talking about before. So the question then is, how much silver would you need or gold do you need? There's no simple answer to this, but just as a tentative idea, I'd think maybe 20 ounces of silver per family member. Now, as of today's prices, I think 20 ounces of silver costs about $600 US. So if you have a family of 4 that you want to get through a depression, you've got to have about $2,500 worth of silver put aside for yourself and your family. But don't take that as financial advice, it's just sort of a tentative idea. One thing I could strongly suggest, and that is don't hold cash during a hyperinflation. You don't want money in that proverbial pillow under the mattress, or in that envelope under the mattress, I should say. You want it out somewhere else because money won't be worth much. And to give you guys a heads up on this, probably would be a good idea to study Weimar Germany, who went through a terrible hyperinflation before the Second World War, modern Zimbabwe, and modern Argentina as well. These two countries have gone through hell in recent years. We should be learning from their experience because that could be our future in the not too distant future. So I'm talking about bleak stuff here so far. I should maybe pivot right now, talk about how to make money and grow yourself in the years ahead. See, during every crisis period, there are people who survive, then there are people who survive and thrive. Now, I want you guys to be in that later category. Not only do I want to prepare you for the worst to come, I want to set you up for the best to come as well. And I'll start by asking you guys a very simple question. That is, what sort of companies do you guys want to invest in? I'll pull up this graphic over here, which was from 2017, but it shows America's top 10 companies over a 100-year period. Have a look at the companies in 1917, the top 10 companies there, and you'll notice they're all industrial age companies. US Steel, there's steel companies, oil companies, rubber companies. These were companies that produced applications for the industrial age. Then have a look at 1967, just 50 years after that point, just as the internet was being invented. You'll see the biggest company in the world at that time was IBM, a tech company. And we're also seeing a few other smaller pseudo-tech companies in there, like Kodak and Polaroid as well. But then fast forward 50 years from there into 2017. By this point in time, the information age is well and truly underway. What you're going to notice here is that the top 5 companies in the world at that point, the top 5 companies in the US at that point are all tech companies. Apple, Alphabet, Microsoft, Amazon, and Facebook. And the lower 5 companies are all financial or industrial companies here. So the general trend over this 100 years is that the industrial companies are falling out of the top 10 and the information age companies are taking over. So what was once considered a safe blue chip investment isn't necessarily safe anymore. What you're also going to notice is that these tech companies, they're going to continue to deflate the industrial age companies in the years ahead. So what you should be thinking about is which tech companies should you be investing in and which industrial age companies should you be shorting. Now, I've got a graphic on this slide over here, which is the top 10 companies in the world today. The previous slide had it up to 2017, but this is today. And when I say today, I mean a couple weeks ago, because on this slide here, Nvidia is the 3rd biggest company, whereas just over the last few weeks or so, Nvidia is up at number 1. In either case, that doesn't change things much. What I want you to notice here, though, is of these 10 companies, 8 of them are tech companies and information age companies. One, Berkshire Hathaway, is more of an investment company, and one of them, Saudi Aramco, is an industrial age company doing oil. So if you guys were to take a bet, which one of these 10 companies do you think will survive? Or actually, let me phrase that another way. Which one of these 10 companies do you think is more likely to collapse as the information age goes on? Is it going to be Apple or the AI-based Microsoft or Nvidia? Or is it going to be the oil company? Just look at the trend over the last 100 years, and I'm hoping you guys are saying to yourself, it's probably the oil company. So most likely that's the way to go. So the question then is, what are the other industrial age companies that should collapse? So just as a general idea, you should probably look at shorting companies with industrial age debt. The more industrial age companies pick up debt to grow their balance sheets or to grow their companies, the more likely they are to fail. So that's one general observation. You want to be going with information age companies and you want to be going against industrial companies. And if you did this, followed this simple trend for maybe the last 20, 30 years, you would have set yourself up very well. But it's not too late now. If you follow that simple pattern for the next 10 or 20 years, you'll still do extremely well. Now, back in 2021, I put out a video which I called the 20s cheat sheet for the decade of the 2020s. And this is a screenshot from that cheat sheet. It basically talks about the whole decade of how that's going to go from 2020 to 2022 being a period of pessimism. That's when the lockdowns were happening, everyone was worried about COVID. Then I predicted 2023 to 26 would be a period of optimism. At the time, I think the media was telling us that COVID's here to stay for the long term. We could be having lockdowns for the next 5, 8, even 10 years. But instead, the whole thing just blew over by 2023. But then I'm predicting in 2026 to 27 being a disaster year economically, then a new global war starting shortly thereafter. And off that basis, I asked you guys to keep an eye on several different assets that I thought would be great places to invest. I was predicting a housing bubble to start pretty much that year when the whole lockdowns were happening and the whole real estate market was in tailspin. I was predicting a crypto bubble, which actually did take place, and then the bubble popped and then it's going back up again. We were predicting a gold-silver bubble, a stock market bubble, an AI bubble, which if you look at the screenshot over here, I was expecting that to end in 2023. But it's obviously still going on now, so don't hold me to the end date of the AI bubble. Obviously, I didn't edit the screenshot that I've taken here. I'm just giving you that information as I gave it to you a few years ago. But after that, I was also predicting a boom in India based off what we were talking about in the last video, and also a boom in commodities too. So have a look at these different asset classes here, and what you're going to notice is they're either based around technology or they're based around surviving a depression. That's the basis on which I was able to make a lot of these predictions in the past, because we could look at the energy of Saturn and the energy of Venus and then the energy of Rahu and Jupiter and all these other planets and figure out which was going to be successful and which wasn't. Okay, so that's really all I have to say about finances and economics. There's a lot to cover in that area, from how to guide your kids into a better job for their future, how to invest and grow your long-term future, and also how to survive the chaos in the short term. Now what I'd like to talk about is spirituality. This is actually the most important aspect of your life. I know in the last video I said that your health is the most important aspect of your life, and I probably said that your family is the most important aspect of your life too, but spirituality is also the most important aspect of your life. You see, your spirituality transcends even your current life. And we're about to go through a period of a lot of chaos in the next few years before we get to the really, really good times. And this is the time that you want to be nurturing your soul. You see, it's not enough just to survive physically in this chaos. It's not enough to help your family survive and to grow yourself financially. You need to grow yourself spiritually as well. Times of chaos are also the times that you can churn through the most karma. And the more karma you remove, the more your true soul will begin to express its true self, and the happier you're going to be. See, the information age is going to be a great time for spiritual people. It's going to be a horrible time for materialistic people. Remember, materialistic society or materialism is based off the energy of Rahu. That's collapsing right now, whereas spirituality is based on truth, which is based off the energy of Jupiter. That's being built up and strengthened right now. So there are three main planets that can remove your karma in this time and help you through this period. That's the energy of the Sun, the energy of Jupiter, and the energy of Saturn. The Sun removes your karma basically by giving birth to you. It creates life, and in being born you inherit karma and you dissolve some of your karma. Jupiter is more of an active principle here. You see, in order to be born via the Sun's energy, you don't really need to do anything at all. That just happens on autopilot, basically. But with Jupiter, that removes your karma through wisdom, through learning and meditating and praying and doing all these spiritual practices. The more wisdom you accumulate, the more ignorance you destroy within yourself. And as that happens, you destroy your own negative karma. Positive and negative karma. So Jupiter is actually the best way to get rid of your bad energy, through learning and spiritual growth. But then there's a third planet, Saturn. And that removes your karma through suffering. So if you're not willing to learn, if you're not willing to grow, Saturn comes in and does the hard work for you. Or more correctly, it puts you in impossible and difficult situations, so you're forced to grow through suffering. If you would give a choice between how you grow, through wisdom or suffering, always pick wisdom. Jupiter's a better friend to you in this case. So in the years ahead, there'll be a lot of suffering around the world. You want to be leaning into the energy of Jupiter via meditation or via reading scriptures or what have you. That will help you grow spiritually. But I also want to share with you guys what I call the secret path of spirituality. And it's simply 3 steps that you can summarize in 9 words. Step 1 is to find your life purpose. Step 2, to silence your mind. And step 3 is to maintain that silence. If you can just do these 3 simple steps, then you'll find they summarize all of the world's religions. You see, in the Dark Ages, religion was important. They would tell you in that era the only way to get to heaven was to belong to the right group. Whereas in the Information Age, there'll be more mystics than religious people. People who, through introspection, grow spiritually rather than grow through external religious symbols or affiliations here. All you have to do is figure out what your life purpose is, just as a starting point. And I know I make that sound easy, but a lot of people spend decades and decades of their life trying to figure out the answer to that question. What is their purpose? I'm hoping you guys are spiritual enough that you've already got some inclination on this one. But once you do that, then you got to start your meditations and find a way to quieten your mind down so it's not distracting you from your life purpose. Once you get into those initial states of samadhi, then it's a very simple thing of maintaining that silence. And these 3 steps, for a lot of people, they'll take a zillion lifetimes to achieve. But as we go through this chaotic period ahead, this will be the 3 steps that will save you the most spiritually. So I'm going to wrap up this video here in this slide and the next one. I hope you guys understand why this video series is so important and why I've been calling it the most important video series I'm ever going to make. So there's nothing that's going to happen in my lifetime, I believe, that's more important or more significant than the birth of the Information Age. And as we go through this period, expect to see all social, political institutions around you collapse. It's going to be quick. It will be over the next few years. So it's already been happening for nearly 30 years now. And as this collapse happens, expect to see all those institutions being rebuilt into something better. And what you want to do is to rebuild your life around these new institutions, not the old ones. Remember I was saying before, are you going to trust the old banks or are you going to trust the new blockchains? Arrange your finances so that you're with the structure that's going to survive best into the future. Now, in the coming months and maybe years ahead, I'll be doing more videos on this theme, but the next video I'll be doing is a very simple Q&A. I've been getting a lot of great questions from you guys from the previous 2 videos, and I want to answer them by really putting them all together. I should also mention that YouTube deleted some of the comments that you guys were leaving in the past videos. So if I haven't replied to you on those ones, I'd like you to post them again so I can formally answer them for you in a Q&A video. Now, just in summary of these last 3 videos, here's what I want you guys to do. Pick a part of the world where you and your family can thrive in this new era. And find a way to settle there between 2026 to 2043 somehow. In addition to that, I'd like you guys to build your wealth, which is your health, family, money, and spirituality. Then, very simply, find a way to stay safe during the coming wars. During all this chaos, you should try to be adaptable, expect change, and expect yourself to change with changing circumstances. And then finally, the last most important thing here is start to meditate. Again, the more spiritual growth you go through in this period, the better your overall next several lifetimes will be. Alright guys, that's where I'm going to end this video. If you have questions on this one, put in the comment section below. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks a lot guys.